You guys, I gotta tell you, I feel compelled to just apologize for being me in the event that you've come along this far and have perhaps been offended by me multiple times inadvertently. I hope you know. I am a child of the previous century, was born there, and definitely am swimming upstream when it comes to checking my rhetoric, if you will. So please excuse any words that I may have ever said that may have poked you in the wrong way. Oh, see, there, I did it again. Anyway, today I am speaking with my good friend, Abby Rose, who is a farmer, a physicist, and a soil health advocate. She is the co-founder of Vidacycle Tech, which makes web applications that support farmers on their regenerative path, wherever that starts. And I've used Abby's apps. I've spent a lot of time with her. I think the world of her. And this episode kind of, for me at least, is, part 2 of what we started with the episode with Jim from Red Shirt Farm, wherein we sort of expose the tender underbelly of the systems that we're all working in and trying very hard to keep our heads above. And in this episode, Abby and I talk about her other work, which is on an awesome podcast, if you haven't already found it, called Farmerama Radio. And if you haven't already discovered that, go find it. And specifically, we talk a lot about the Cultivating Justice one and the Landed series, both of which are excellent. The fashion series is also excellent. But Abby's experience in working with an international cadre of farmers and land stewards who are on a journey, starting a journey, deep in a journey, has given her some pretty keen perspective on the lay of the land in terms of what we're really up against when it comes to, trying to hold the space of regenerative systems, holistic systems within a global economy that really kind of works against that in a lot of ways. So that's the very long-winded way of teeing up this episode, which I hope you will enjoy. I enjoyed recording it very much, and I hope it kept it real for you. We're getting close to the end here, people, so you're almost done with me. And I'm still so grateful for the opportunity to have had these conversations and share them with you. So, like I said, ignore whatever ridiculous things I've said and just try to hone in on the awesome things that the people I talk to say. See you after.
Today's episode is brought to you by Rimmel Greenhouses.
Whether it's tomatoes to market, flowers in the spring, or your family's harvest, growing in a greenhouse protected from the weather provides the right environment that you need for a harvest that you can count on. Rimmel Greenhouses are designed for durability and offer the quality that you need to grow productively year-round. Visit rimmelgreenhouses.com to get a quote today.
If I may editorialize for a second, I own a Rimmel tunnel. I love it. We built it ourselves, and I really appreciated the quality of the tunnel as well as the customer service we received in the process, so make sure to check them out. Today's episode is also brought to you by Real Organic Project. Does your farm deserve to be recognized for all the hard work done on behalf of the environment and your community? Real Organic Project is an add-on certification that partners with 1,000 plus certified organic farms across North America, including my own farm, Rough Draft Farmstead. Available at no cost to farmers and with minimal time commitment, it is a great way to differentiate your farm from mass-marketed corporate organic, where hydroponic production and animal confinement are still commonplace. Real Organic Project is a whole farm certification program to distinguish crops grown in healthy soils and livestock raised humanely on pasture. As a farmer-led movement, we know many hands make for quick work. I hope you will lend yours by signing up for Real Organic Project certification today. Visit realorganicproject.org/no-till to apply. That's realorganicproject.org/no-till to apply. All right, enjoy the show.
Abby, I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time. Thank you so much for making the time for me. Again, I know we've had some scheduling issues. It's been quite a winter.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here, and just such a joy to be in conversation with you, Mimi.
Same, always. Well, Abby, let's start with where you are, because you are kind of a jet setter, but you're on your home farm right now. And I would love it if you could just share with the audience a little bit about who you are, your history with farming, and how you came to be doing it again. I mean, I know you grew up on the farm, but tell us a little bit about yourself and about Vidacycle, and then we'll get into all the other cool things about you.
Great. Yeah. So I'm Abby Rose, and currently I'm sitting on my family's farm here in Chile, in the Maule region of Chile. Looking out the window, it's very similar to a Northern Californian vista, really. Lots of, it's a Mediterranean dryish climate. And we're really constantly working against desertification, I would say, is the key pressure here. And so we're focused on diversity, and we have olives and almonds, and we have our vegetable gardens, and we graze sheep between the olives and almonds. And then we also have small vineyard as well, where we make a natural wine.
Has it always been this diverse, or is that a recent development on your family's farm?
Yeah, so my parents started farming here the land, they started on the land 20 years ago. And when they got here, there was only vines. And then there was quite a regrowing native forest. So when we first started, we planted 8,000 olive trees. And actually, we were in a big fire in 2017. One of the super fires that happened just before the first Californian super fires, really, January 2017. And the whole farm burned, part of like 6 million acres that burned around here. So we were a small calamity in that. But that meant that a lot of the olive trees were lost because they were under 5 years old. And so that we have about 1,000 olive trees remaining in production. And they're only just back in production, really, actually. And so we planted almonds and some pistachios and walnuts after that. Cool. We didn't ever replant any almonds after that. Any olives after that. I think, it's pretty devastating when you lose most of what you've been focused on for like 10 years previously. So the diversification, in a way, the fire came at a time where actually it was exciting to have this possibility to think, okay, we can do this a bit differently. And we were clear that we wouldn't plant 8,000 olive trees just all together again. So that's why we went for this more diverse approach. So definitely it looks very different than it did what we designed when we first got here. And also we really have focused much more on the recognition that actually all this native forest is a big part of the farm. I think when I initially got here, I just saw it as an additional kind of unproductive bit of the landscape. It was a nice idea that we were going to conserve it, but whatever. And now I realize that it's the beating heart of the farm, because it's the core of the hydrology here. It's the core of where our water comes from. And without that, it's all over. I mean, we're dry farming, but you still need water.
Yeah.
Life needs water. So yeah, my understanding of the farm has completely changed to recognizing the native forests as a key part of our farm cycle and our farm system here. And, many people around us, they get water delivered every week because there's just no water in the land here anymore. The water tables are much lower, I guess. But we've never run out of water here. So we're one of the few people around, and we don't have any super deep wells.
That's incredible. Yeah, that's a real I mean, that's a real testament to what you're doing and where your values are. So your family moved there, just listening to you, I think people will probably recognize that maybe you weren't originally from there. So was there a history of farming in your family, or was this a life shift or what?
It was a definite life shift. I grew up in the UK, in the north of the UK. My parents are from California, which is, I have a slight American twang, but I grew up and was born in the UK. And we always lived opposite a farm. And the farm landscape was always part of my life. But actually, I'm sort of ashamed to admit that I really thought farming was irrelevant and sort of backwards. If I think about it, looking back now, I can see I was much more enthused by fashion and science and tech and all these things that were, in inverted commas, cool. And farming really wasn't there. So it was only once we started, once my parents are here, and I was a bit like, why the heck is why are my mom and dad going to go farming? Like, so random. And then I spent some time, I studied physics at university. And just after I finished my physics degree, I came here and spent 4 or 5 months here. And that was when I really started to recognize that farming's an incredibly complex, so many variables, so many questions. It's an amazing learning journey. And that actually the decisions we are making day to day on our farm don't just affect this little bit of land. They affect our neighbors here, but then also, we graze our animals rotationally or whatever, mob graze them here. And we've seen that change the soil here, or the water retention anyway. And that's affecting, you could say that's affecting how much carbon there is in the atmosphere, because we're sequestering more carbon with healthier soils, healthier plants, and therefore that's actually affecting everyone. Mm-hmm. So it was through that realization of farming actually being core to all of our lives, and that day-to-day decisions on a farm affect us all, that I became not obsessed, but very focused on farming.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in our limited opportunities to have conversations, I have, but we found so much common ground. And, whether it was you being in the United States or me being in the UK, I know that I think it's actually quite fair to say that you have not just been focused, but obsessed in the best possible way on with this idea of what, to your earlier point, farming is not just a one size fits all definition, I guess. And, at least my impression of your work heretofore has been about exploring some of the ideas related to, questioning what we're doing, and that we don't have to, how we're doing it now is not how we have to be doing it, any of it. And so I would love to get deeper into that. But first, I really want you to talk about your sort of off-farm entrepreneurial, seemingly unwettable appetite to bring in a lot of your, your expertise and your background, because I think it's been an incredible gift to the farming community, the other work that you've done, sort of the off-farm work that you've done. So would you talk about that? Definitely.
Yeah, I'd love to. I think I should probably say that my dad died just over or almost 2 years ago. And so my management of the farm fully is a relatively, it was unexpected that I would be in this position so soon. So I had found other ways to be involved in farming. And, I was thinking the transition would be more gradual, but it's not. Mm-hmm. And that's how it goes. So I have a lot of other things going on. I guess probably the first one to focus on is that early on in the journey here, we had these 8,000 olives, and it became very clear that it was almost impossible to keep track of, you would see with this one olive or this area of olives wasn't doing very well. And we would have a question like, well, was it also not doing well last year? Or is this a new phenomenon? Was there just a frost pocket here? And you just end up with all these questions. And when there's 8,000 trees, you can't remember it all. And so because of my physics background, I was able to code. And so I developed a software. It's called Sector Mentor. And it allowed us, or we use it today. We have a NFC or contactless chip on every tree. And then I'm able to go around with my phone, scan that tag, and I can take a photo, record what I'm seeing at that tree, and I can look at the history of that tree. And then also back on the computer, I can assess, how many of our trees are in excellent condition, how many in good, when did we last apply a vermicompost, TT, whatever, all these kinds of things. And in my remote management of the farm as well, that really is incredibly helpful too, to be able to tune in and see what's going on. And then that now, I live most of the year in the UK. And so I guess other people found out about it essentially through some media articles and some of our neighbors. And so we got involved with some vineyards, particularly Davenport vineyards in the UK. And they really helped us develop some of the vineyard tools. So we also have a Sector Mentor set of tools that's specific to vineyards. And I think all of it's coming from this perspective of recognizing that, observation is really the core of a more ecological farming approach. You could call it regenerative, organic, whatever you want to call it. I'm not saying those are equivalent by any means. I'm just saying that it's a more ecological approach, and that that is the core of what Sector Mentor is about. And then from that, it's like really showing that your observations can be incredibly valuable, and then creating visualizations and graphs and understanding how you can learn from those observations as best as possible. So that's the focus. And then we also have in more recent years, I worked together with a group in the UK called Pasture for Life. And they had done some research about, what does it mean as a farmer to be able to monitor the pulse of your soil? Because so often, you can do a lab test and send off for lab results and you get them back, and it's very detached from the experience of being in the soil. And so they brought together soil scientists and farmers and soil advocates, and they all looked at the different visual assessments that were available and agreed on, the top 20 that both farmers and scientists thought were valuable. And from that, we started to develop an app called Soil Mentor. And that is very much, again, about this focus on observation, but this time focused on soil and biodiversity. So what can you learn? What are the tests you can do when you're actually going and digging a hole in your soil or looking above ground? What can you really begin to understand about the soil health and how alive your soil is? And I was really excited to partner with Nicole Masters in recent years. I think 2 years ago, we started our partnership. And she really helped us take Soil Mentor to the next level, which was we worked with her to hone the 10 regenerative indicators. That's everything from like an earthworm count to rhizosheath observations, legume nodule scoring. So, it's a variety of different observations you can do. And then from there, we put together from her knowledge base and research, a set of benchmarks. So you can see, how do I compare to the expectations for your soil type, for your climate, and then for your farming system. So you're compared to those. And then also some thoughts from Nicole about how to move forward. If this is your situation, it doesn't give you advice, but it asks you questions from a regenerative perspective of what might you change or do differently.
And I want to pause here, just because I think it's always hard to, it's always hard to toot your own horn, if you will. But I would like to just take the opportunity to, just thank you for the work that you've done, because one of the things that I think is so amazing about the apps that you've created is that, you know, there aren't that many scientists turned farmers. There are very few of us, actually. And out in the real world, there are, you know, hands in the dirt. I mean, that's what they've done their whole lives, right? And yet now to move forward or to join this movement of, you know, championing soil health and really driving their crops back towards a, you know, not just a homeostatic sort of okay, but to really charge forward and be a part of, like, you know, the future resilience of their own communities. There is a huge barrier, not just of intimidation, but also of just the background required to just start engaging deeply in these scientific principles. And what I love about your apps is that it really, it meets people not only where they are, but it shows them how powerful they already were with their own observations, and just by codifying. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've said, you know, like, you've been looking at this problem for years. You know, are you writing it down? Are you writing down what changes? Or, you know, because that's how I mean, remember the first time you and I met, I think I showed you my notebook collection. I hadn't even been able to put any of this into an Excel spreadsheet yet. And yet it is our most powerful tool. And anybody who has a background in science knows if you're not measuring it, we can't really talk about it in any kind of categorical way. And yet we have all of these beautiful tools in our toolboxes, and just this depth of institutional memory. And that's what I love about your apps. I think that not only do they, you know, sort of remind people how powerful they are, but they give them the most simple ways of organizing that information and seeing it in a way that they can actually take action. And so yes. I just want to do a little plug there, because I think that you've done an incredible job of building those things, and not to create dependencies on outside experts or any of that. It puts the tool, it puts the power back in the hands of the practitioner.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I think that's been our key focus from the beginning. I guess that's sort of my passion, is like empowering people to be their own expert. And also just recognizing that often farmers or land managers or whatever, you know, caretakers of the land, whoever it is who's in that position, they often are the expert of that land, or they've had it stripped away from them. Like, there are many cases where, you know, that power has been taken, whether they like it or not. But I think that this is very much about that. It's like recognizing how powerful you can be and the value you are generating by looking. And then, trying to make that as visual and codified, as you say, as possible. I think a really nice example recently that I got to see was when, so we do work with organizations who work with farmers. So often Soil Mentor is, you know, for example, there's an organization in Australia called Soils for Life. And they were working with a group of 20 farmers in a project who were using Soil Mentor. And we worked with them to, the farmers collected data it was just about 4 of the regen indicators in that case. And then they came together, and Nicole Masters did a coaching session with them online, so remotely. And each farmer was able to share, you know, their images on Soil Mentor, and like, this was what my riser sheaths looked like. This was how deep my roots were in this area versus this area, and have a conversation. And just the level of learning that happens and the level of communication in that, you know, they only had like 10 to 15 minutes each, but it was unbelievably powerful to see that happening. And it's something that, you know, it couldn't have happened. Well, it's very unlikely that Nicole Masters is going to turn up at everyone's farm.
Totally. Yeah.
And anyone, you know, that's is not going to work like that. So being able to share what they thought, what they saw, and exchange with an educator and build their knowledge base, and also watch each other and learn from each other at the same time. It was just, for me, that was a moment of like, this is so exciting. This is how it can work, because there is a real, I don't know, in the UK anyway today, there's a real lack of people who are able to support those who are starting to think more regeneratively or working in that way. And so, of course, the app is there to support, but actually, you can't just hand someone an app and think that it's all going to be okay.
No.
Like,
yeah.
You need to have the camaraderie, the ability to ask those questions and talk through them, to compare. And so, having ways to bring in that kind of support, that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have a local regenerative support person, because that isn't always available. In an ideal world, you would definitely have that person, but just not enough people are skilled enough in that way yet, I would say.
Totally. And I think that the way they become skilled is, oftentimes, at least what I've observed, is that those, it's largely missing anymore, but those networks of farmer to farmer sort of education and support, that used to be how communities were arranged. Farmers didn't go to their chemical reps. They went to each other to talk about the problems that they were having and what they found as solutions. And when those things start happening again, it's incredible. Like you say, in a couple of hours, the sort of exponential increase in both sort of doubling down on the passion around, what we're doing and what we're engaged in, but then also just being excited again about, maybe something's wrong on your farm, but now you have 3 more things that you can try.
Mm-hmm.
And you have the support of your community, because I think one of the things that we who do work on the land often find ourselves in these positions of feeling very isolated, very out of tools, and not a lot of places to go for help. And so I think you're absolutely right. Those networks are huge, especially as the educator piece is still pretty lacking, I think, in terms of like especially from region to region, it varies a lot. There are some places where there's just a whole lot of them. And then there are places where nobody's heard the word. Everybody thinks it's still a crazy idea. So I think it's incredibly powerful. And it is one of the few times when I can really get behind technology because it really has, I think, been very powerful in terms of empowering the people on the land. And you also do a bit of podcasting.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful. Your podcast is Farmerama, and it's one of my favorites. And so talk about how that came to be.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head there in what you just said, in the sense that it is very isolating often, and you're left with all these questions. And if you don't have a community, which actually on the farm here in Chile, I recognize I'm an outsider here, initially anyway, less so now, but we just had a lot of questions and not a lot of answers, and definitely no one had heard it, or no one was talking about regenerative, and even more ecological. It was still seen as an anomaly. And so that's how and why I started to create Farmerama. It was very much going and seeing some of the farming work. It was very much going and seeing what was happening in the UK. Actually, I went to a Land Workers Alliance event. It was a farm hack event. And it was amazing to go there and see all the different experiments that farmers were doing and the knowledge sharing they had, and whether they were, building a biochar maker or a compost tea bubbling machine. I mean, this was in 2014, maybe. So, it was early days for some of these kinds of conversations, as far as I knew. And it was just a wealth of energy and knowledge. And then I left the event and there was nothing. It's like this void of information out there. So I really realized, like, we need to have some consistency in this kind of knowledge sharing. And I know there's amazing things happening, but how can I access it? And how can anyone access it, for that matter? So we were already making podcasts about tech for good at the time. And so I worked with the person, Joe Barrett, who was making the podcasts about that with. He got together and we had one other person with us at the time. And we started to make Farmerama, and we just started going to farm events and meeting with different farms that were exciting and interesting and recording short. Our idea of Farmerama is to kind of create a magazine of what's happening and the experiments people are doing, so that as many people can learn that experiment is happening. And then, if they want to go and find out more, if that's relevant to them, they can go and talk to that person and recognize what's going on and where, because that's the way that we can all collectively learn, well, more quickly and really learn from each other as best as possible, is to know what's happening out there and to know who's doing what. So yeah, that's where it started. And then pretty quickly it became, I guess I was already traveling around wanting to learn from farms and asking questions. And so it was great to be able to say, oh, well, I'm going to record this and then we're going to share it with a lot more people. And then in 18 or 19, I can't remember anymore, we decided to step things up, and we actually got some funding. Some funders took a real punt on us, actually, because we didn't have any examples of this, and we created a series about the growing kind of the new grains movement in the UK. It was called Cereal with a C, and that was a real hit. It was 6 parts, and it really told the story of the grains movement through the lens of bread, and then breeding and population wheats, and what does that mean, and heritage varieties, and then going into how do people farm them, and why does it relate to the farming, and how does that relate to all of us, and then the processing and the baking and milling. And yeah, it just really resonated with a lot of people, I think. And it won awards for, best food podcast. So that also shocked people that this farming podcast would be relevant in the food world. And then from there, we've gone on to do a number of other series. One of my recent favorites was Landed.
Absolutely. I've shared that so many times. Cereal also, I have to say, outstanding. So good. Anybody who's listening to this, hurry up and go find all of these things. I thought the fashion one was also so good. I mean, it's what I love about these series that you've been able to do is that you're able to kind of go more deeply into all of these things and show the many, many, many ways that they're connected. And I think that it's difficult to do in a podcast because, it can't be more than, I mean, I'm really testing these boundaries myself, but you can only make each episode so long. And, and yet you've been able to make these series into, like very consumable mini series that really deeply explore some of these issues and questions.
Yeah. I think what we really do at Farmerama is we do stick with the complexity as much as we can, and really the true farming experience. And, I think the fact that I've had some farming experience really helps us to stay with the complexity of farming, and just keep bringing that all the time. I think that's something that often gets overlooked in most mainstream media, and is a big part of what is missing from the conversation for most people. Is to understand the food system fully. I think you need to understand some of these nuances and complexities of the farming landscape and what it really means to interact with the land and to produce food or to produce fiber. And I like the Farming Fashion recent series because, the focus there was both to help designers to understand some of the decisions that farmers are making and why they're making them in terms of wool. And, really, literally how that sheep is grazed will affect that wool at the end, and for them to understand that. But then also for the farmers to understand some of the questions and concerns of the designers. And that, that's often the biggest struggle in these new designers who do want to be, creating carbon friendly or carbon positive clothing, which FiberShed, really supports and is showing is possible. But they often, that conversation is so jilted, or it just can't happen because the languages are so different and the experiences are so different and the concerns. So the nice thing about the Farming Fashion series is it allows people to cross that barrier in both directions and then be able to actually have a conversation and move things forward. And I also think that was true of the Landed series and also Cultivating Justice. Mm-hmm. That is a series we produced together with Lion, which is Land in Our Names, a Black-led reparative justice or land-based movement in the UK. And then also it's called Out on the Land, which is a LGBTQIA plus group within Land Workers Alliance in the UK. And producing that series together with those two groups was, for me, one of just a really mind-blowing and wonderful experience. It was very enriching and fulfilling. And I hope that the podcast series, and I think it does share that richness, that working together in that way and the multi different perspectives on what it even means to be in relationship with land. Because, here I am talking about farming all the time. That's very much a single perspective on all this. And actually that wider question of relationship to land and culture and society and racial justice, it's so intertwined in all of these conversations. And so really bringing that all together in that series was, beautiful.
That series is incredible. I was going to give it its own little bit of our conversation here because I think that it had this sort of put an exclamation point on the other series that we've already mentioned, but in that there are these conversations that are they're totally necessary in order for the outcome to match the responsibility of this moment. And yet most people, everybody eats, everybody wears clothes. Most people wear them at least a good percentage of the time. And we all are a part of this moment in time where we're really looking deeply into our pasts and our relationships with each other. And, not everybody's thinking about the relationship to land, but they need to. And what I love about that series in particular is that a lot of people don't even know what the questions are. They don't even know where to begin the conversation. And all of these series, but especially that one, is really kind of giving the conversation the time and the energy and the audience, not the audience, but the participants that will fully explore and fully expose the details that get lost in this need to soundbite everything. It's like if you're consuming media to sort of figure out where you're supposed to land on any given issue, you are getting the dumbest version of that in almost every instance. And yet, this medium has allowed you to do the highest possible justice to all of these very important topics. And I think that, and that really is about sort of a perspective that you have and an approach that you have that is pretty unique in the world. And I really, I've listened to that one several times already, all the way through.
Me too.
Yeah. It gets better every time. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I find it's like a fun fair of experience for me, that series, because and there are some moments that are pretty bleak. Yeah. As I realize things as well, and I recognize, my whiteness, I'm faced by that, and my own preconceptions about how things are. Yeah, like it's confronting, but at the same time, I think what's beautiful about it is it's also inviting. And one of the things I've really learned from the Lion and the Utul communities is the importance of celebration, the importance of ceremony, the importance of connecting with the beauty through the darkness as well. And hopefully that series really shares that.
Well, and healing is only going to happen together. It's not going to happen separately. And I love that about that series, because it is, all of these things have aspects of bleakness and deep pain. And yet I think that the tone of it is one of looking to heal together, looking to, examine ourselves, but also feel vulnerable around each other in a way that doesn't provoke judgment or any of those things. And I really love the tone. So I have so many things I want to talk to you about, but before we segue into something more complicated, you and I talked a little bit offline about how, since you have sort of come into come back to the farm in a more, kind of full-time way, unexpectedly, you have sort of adopted a regenerative, or are embarking on adopting a regenerative business model. And that doesn't get talked about a lot, but I think that, one of the things that I love about you is that you assume that there needs to be a holistic approach to everything, and you take that very seriously, and you hold yourself accountable to that. And so if you wouldn't mind just talking about like, what does that mean? What does that look like? And what is it showing you?
Yeah. Yes, I do that. Sometimes painfully so, but yes. So I guess, the starting point for the regenerative, what does it mean to have a regenerative business? We really focus on the Vidacycle, the apps business, because within the technology world, there's more room for exploring this, essentially. And that business, I'm just more further along with that, so I understand it better. And so we've, over the last few years, as a team, there's 6 of us, so we're a small team, but we put together a set of regenerative business principles. That was our starting place. Because what we noticed is that, so much of the technology out there to support the farming world, and most technology out there as well, just most businesses out there, it's all very well, trying to support regenerative farming. But if your business in itself is extractive by its very nature, which many businesses today are, the way they're built, then it's almost impossible to build a regenerative farming system, because you're just constantly going to have this extractive force that will be draining the system in some way. And so I started to realize this with farm businesses I was seeing. Like, you could see people really trying to make a difference, and then some new owner would come in, or something would happen, and they would, whoever was like thinking from a positive perspective before, all of that was gone, and suddenly the money was sucked out of the business, and it's all lost. All is lost. So, we look, what does it mean to be a regenerative business behind all this? And so we started with the regenerative business principles. And this was very much inspired by the work of a lady in LA who created something called the Feminist Business Principles. She's called Jennifer Armbrust, and she has a company called Sister.is. And
very cool company, by the way. Definitely check her out.
Totally. And I remember in the early days of business, I did have some pretty, I was thinking, what is the way forward here? Because I don't have $1 billion aims in my head. And yet everyone else in this world, that's what they're looking to do. They're looking to raise venture capital. And then, everyone has to have their $1 billion vision. And I just wasn't interested. I didn't think that was our future. So when I read her Feminist Business Principles, that was the first time that I was it immediately clicked with me. And it was a real sigh of relief that I could bring things like, the first principle is you have a body. Mm-hmm. And I just wasn't hearing that in the business world at all, that was possible. And that I think the second principle is you're connected to the earth and all living beings. Again, wasn't hearing that in business. So it gave me, So it suddenly gave the space that it was okay to think about and care about those things and do business. They weren't just charitable aims. These are part of what it means to run a business. And so, starting from that place, we iterated on them and created our own regenerative business principles. And those two are both still in there. Another of my favorites is a business can be a healing for yourself and others. Again, that's something I'm constantly coming back to, is in the same way we were just talking about healing, the business has to be healing too. Yeah. It can't be extracting from us as people. And so that was where we started. And then in the last year or so, there are some very real realities about running a business, financial realities. You have to be making enough money to be able to fund yourself month to month. You have to have cash flow, and you do have to make a profit, because if you don't, you'll just be constantly declining. You can't do any R&D. You can't fund things that you need to fund. I'm not saying a massive profit, but there needs to be some profit for a business. And so I was noticing that was sort of in tension with the business principles. And so I did a bit of looking around, and I read some books, and I came across this idea of the open finance. Yeah. Open finance model or open business model. Anyway, essentially it meant that I would have to, I would invite everyone in the team to get a fay with the balance sheet, and the profit and loss and cash flow, and not actually everyone in the team had been able to access those previously, but of course no one does. And most people can't understand them anyway. People don't understand how they relate to them. So this is about really making sure everyone understands what it means for them, and then coming back to that again and again, and just having that shared ownership and shared responsibility around what is this business doing and what does it mean for you in your life. And that has been, I was really scared about it. Really, really scared to share that kind of information with everyone, because, there's lots of things in a business that are scary. Yep. And I was totally, positively shocked by how everyone felt really excited, for one, to be invited in at this level. And there's been a shift in how everyone relates to the business. Obviously, our longer term aim is that people do have, it's very clear how any profit or anything that does benefit the business is redistributed between the team. But that isn't the starting place for us. Actually, even just having the shared ownership and knowledge of how the business is going has changed how people interact with the business. And everyone's coming up with ideas of how we go forward. Someone's suggesting, we should look at this. And it's just yeah, it's been really, really exciting and amazing. And so I can really see that, business is about, today, it is part of the financial system we're in. And so you do have to play that game to a certain level, and really trying to understand what that looks like from a regenerative lens is an exciting new aspect of what we're doing and incorporating. And so we'll see. I'll report back. We're only like 5 months into that.
But it's super exciting, I think, because I often find myself just driven to distraction by the modern sort of definitions that are used to, I guess, punctuate where the decisions, what the decision makers are. And oftentimes, profit is, just right in front of everything else. Nothing else can really be a part of the conversation. And yet there are these opportunities for working, unfortunately working within certain systems, but where you can find agency to shift the priorities a little bit, not to say, we're not going to be profitable, but that there might be some value in, using terms like the word enough and, where we can start changing the way we live through business. And I think that's super exciting. And I do look forward to catching up on that. As you explore it more deeply. So how has working from all of these angles, all of the different aspects of the work that you do, how has that changed how you think about the work that you want to do?
Yeah, great question. Well, what I would say is that when I started out, making Farmerama, making the apps, farming at all, I really was so focused. I got a bit annoyed when people would go into social issues or anything that wasn't to do with just the practical implementation of farming. That was like my focus, because you can probably tell I'm quite a practical person, and I don't like when people talk in abstractions. That irritates is unfair, but I feel like I don't understand, and I don't like that. I want to know very practical and often visual ways of understanding things. And so that I saw everything else as a distraction initially. Again, ashamed to say it, but it's good to just be honest about how it was. And then it's, as you can tell, it's been a real learning journey for me, in that I, through relationships I built, through reading Leah Penniman's book, through, interviewing her, I've had many moments where I've done step changes in learning of oh, wow, I completely misunderstood this before. And actually, not only is this not a distraction, it's core to what we're looking to do here. And I think that I'm very grateful to be able to have had those learning moments and learning, and then to share them through Farmerama also. And that has really changed my approach and perspective here, and what I'm focused on. And I think the business example is another one. I really feel like I've been through many, many conversations now where people say, oh, it's marketing, or, oh, it's, we need a better idea of what the regenerative practices are, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, not to dismiss that. They're important. But for me, what I really feel is the stopping point in really fulfilling on a regenerative future. One of the stopping points is that we don't have a business model, a financial or some sort of model commercial model, that we can live into that will support a more regenerative approach. And I feel like that problem, essentially the big companies are only looking to ever increasing profit, like that is what they're legally accountable to, that is actually gonna stop everything.
Mm-hmm.
Like if that is the context we're working in, then a regenerative farming future will not be realized.
Today's episode of the No-Till Market Garden podcast is brought to you by Orisha. Orisha is a greenhouse automation company whose mission is to make agriculture more ecological and productive through advanced technology. Orisha automates all temperature, humidity, and irrigation management systems. Their products are designed to be instinctive, easy to install, and wireless, and their remote management application allows growers to save time. In addition, the integration of AI in their programs offers more precision and better control over the various factors influencing the environment inside your greenhouse. Last thing, Orisha wants to help market gardeners optimize their yields. Automating allows a better quality of life, can save several weeks of labor costs, and saves nearly 20% in energy costs. Listeners can use the promo code NOTILLGROWER, that's 3 words, NOTILLGROWER, to get 15% off your order. Check them out at orisha.io. That's ORISHA.io. Today's episode is also brought to you by Tilth Soil. This Cleveland, Ohio-based company is producing some of the highest quality potting mixes out there. One of the biggest lessons I learned in farming is the importance of good seed starting mixes, and that's why I included Tilth Soil in my book and have been using their seed starting mix, Sprout, on my farm since 2020. Tilth Soil produces potting mixes approved for use in organic operations like our own. Their living soil is made with fully composted food waste they collect and process themselves. Whether you need a cubic yard super sack once a year or ongoing deliveries for your year-round operation, Tilth has you covered. The team at Tilth can help with shipping, coordination, and provide ongoing support throughout the growing season. To learn more, visit www.tilthsoil.com. That's tilthsoil.com. All right, back to the show.
And this is where I really wanted our conversation to go, because you and I have had some wonderful one-on-ones about this, and I think it's hard to explore these touchier topics, but I think that these are the conversations. This is where the conversations need to go now, because the practices are known. There are tools, there are ways to move this forward. But what you say, I can't put a finer point on it. The biggest barrier is this sort of climate of our minds and the way that we have become entrenched in the systems that are holding us back. And in the series Landed, it was so, I have to say, I'm just going to admit that it took me a while to listen to the series because, they were longer and, you only have so much time. But when I finally did get around to listening to Landed, I listened to it twice, all the way through, kind of without stopping, because it was really like, there was a twin of mine with the same mind living somewhere else, coming to these same realizations at the same time. And that so many of us are thinking about these things that are really challenging. I mean, just these really sort of densely packed problems that are about everything. And yet you don't want to just throw your hands in the air and be like, well, we can only do so much, because of course we can do more. And I think that that's kind of where I want to go with our conversation now, because, in Landed, and this was just like hearing this really uncomfortable thought that's been in my head. I've wanted to talk about it. I want to talk about it with my peers and my colleagues, but it's hard for some reason. But this idea that I don't believe in land ownership. I think it's a problem. I think it has been, and obviously I'm not suggesting we dismantle everything right now, but I think that I have some real questions about what it means to our relationship with land to think that we own it. I feel much more comfortable with the idea of being owned by the land. And I loved that series was able to gently explore those themes without it sounding like propaganda.
Yeah, well, Cole Gordon is a young Scottish farmer, or he's returning to his family's farm. And he, when he told me about this question that came up, it was one of those things that it just kind of like resonates through your body. And it was uncomfortable to realize that actually, oh yeah, the family farm is a colonial concept. I mean, wow.
Yep.
It's like a before and one of those before and after moments.
Absolutely.
Like reading Leah Penniman's book. It's like, okay, before I thought this, and after I realize my life is different now, or my view is different, because I really had a view before that, the realization of an agroecological future or a regenerative future was a series of small family farms dotted all over the landscape. And that was going to feed us, and that was going to be the beautiful outcome, the vision. And then the realization through that series that the small family farm is a colonial concept. And he lays it out in a way that has meaning, because I think when you just say that statement, it almost doesn't have meaning, or it's very difficult to understand the meaning of it. But he really makes that come alive. And whether that's the fact that the people, the Gaels of the Highlands of Scotland themselves were colonized by the English. And then they went on to colonize themselves on other lands. For example, many of them went to Canada and displaced the First Nations people. And so it's this like chain of reactions that this land ownership concept has brought about. And it was really cool to me also to see that, oh, okay, there was something before the family farm. That was also something I never thought about. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, okay, in the Scottish Highlands, they had one system that worked with their townships. And then they had clans, which were larger land areas it was somewhat kind of owned in common, in a way. And then there were their sheilings that they went to in the summer. And just realizing that actually there are very different ways of being in relationship with land that aren't just this idea of, okay, well, this is my border, this is my land, and that's it. That's the context for what it means to farm and what it means to be in relationship with land. And I think, before that series, I think I found it really, really hard to think outside that context. As you just said, I was so entrenched in the mindset. I couldn't even conceive of what it meant to be outside of it. I heard of how indigenous communities relate, but that often it just seems so removed from my reality. So to spell that out in a way that is a story, and I could learn with Cole as he learned, is very enriching. And now, even for our farm here, I definitely am thinking about it differently. Okay, yes, I am still very much in the old structures in that I own the land, or whatever, our family owns the land. But that's not the future that I want to live into here.
Same.
And so it's like, okay, so that's a nice complex subject, tangle, and just starting to unpick those threads one by one. I do also think that if you jump in too fast, you can also end up in a real mess.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So just starting to figure out what that looks like. And there are some examples out there of people who are realizing what this could look like and what it does mean. Of course, I 100% recognize that the indigenous peoples, this was never in question.
Right.
So forever recognizing that and definitely learning and observing and watching ways in which they also recognize there's many different ideas of what it means to be an indigenous person in this world. But there's, even within that tapestry, just recognizing those different relationships and what that can look like. And then understanding what that, what does it mean to go from this pure land ownership model to that very, the indigenous, even like some people are nomadic, or some people have, areas that are commonly and collectively managed, or what does that mean? Where's that spectrum, and how can we start to crawl across it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the idea. So one of the things that I think, again, it's really not my normal position, but one of the tremendous values of the technology right now, and having a series out there like Landed, if like we could just make it required listening, is that instead of having these topics be, threatening just, because the idea of saying, land ownership is bad. That's not at all what I'm saying. It is what we do now, but that it doesn't have to look the way it looks now. And to be able to explore the more non-threatening, the beneficial aspects of thinking in a different way, and how that might actually save the family unit living on land.
Totally.
It is the way I think that we can start to explore these ideas of, we know, you and I have talked about this. You've explored it. I've explored it, but I have so many conversations with the most, you look at the perfect picture of the, Apricot Lane farm or whatever, whatever version of a holistically managed, diversified, beautiful, nutritious food farm. They are still up against this behemoth of an economy, a world economy that has never reconciled any currency with what it expects in sort of free goods. And that now that's falling on the backs of the smallest farmers because they're at the biggest disadvantage to compete in that kind of a market. And the answer isn't higher prices and more exclusivity in our access to good food, but that this allows us to explore that problem from a different perspective that might actually be the real solution, because the shared responsibility for healing, that's tied directly to this conversation that you're starting. And, I know you would say that you're not the only one starting it, it's happening, but I like the idea of amplifying that and spreading it as quickly as possible, because it's exciting.
I agree. I did start to, in my vision for this small family farm future, I did start to have doubts before we started making Landed. And Cole recognizes those doubts at the beginning of the series as well. Like, you see the struggle all the time. So many small, even if they're making a profit, it's like they're exhausted, or at 50 years old, they don't want to do this anymore, and there's no way out. And or it ends in a divorce because the relationship can't actually manage the amount of pressure and stress that's there. And it seems like the small family farm isn't actually a great model. Like, I'm not saying families aren't, family is fine, but the farm as that small unit is actually extremely, it's a lot of pressure, and it can be very stressful. And also, from a succession point of view these days, just isn't the same.
No.
Thankfully, but also it means that there's a whole new tension around land ownership, and, what does it mean to pass this on? And that's sort of irrelevant, or becoming more and more irrelevant. So we need new models. And so having these alternative ideas pop up is actually, for me, it's like, phew.
Yeah.
God, we don't need, we don't need to go through that. We don't need to get to that. That struggle isn't the end result that we need to go for. And like, there's like a few people we featured on Farmerama at different times who I think exemplify different ways of approaching this. There's like one called, I can't pronounce it. It's a Dutch word, but it's something like Herenboren. Oh, sorry.
That was beautiful.
Wait till the Dutch person hears it. But anyway, and they collectively, they may rent or own a piece of land. That's not the important part, but it's like 200 people who live close. They all pay a deposit to be part of the farm. And then they also pay a weekly contribution. And that then pays for the farmer to grow their veg and maybe eggs and maybe meat. And it just turns the model on its head in a way. Instead of this single family unit that needs to produce for all these others, it's like all these others are coming to a collective space and recognizing, okay, maybe they don't want to farm. That's okay. But that they can be part of what it means to be on that land, to farm that land, and that the farmer isn't the person taking on the most risk. In fact, they take on the least risk in all of this, in that situation. And I think, to me, that's okay. It's not exactly about land ownership, but it's an example of a model where it just starts to make a little more sense in terms of that relationship with food and what's coming from the land and what's being put back into the land. Because suddenly those people have a vested interest in that land, the soil being healthy, because they want to eat healthy plants and have healthy animals. And the price isn't high. It's not cheap, but it's not extortionate either. It's not this like super
the premium model,
just elitist
exactly.
way of supplying food, which I totally get why people end up there, because that's what they need to do in order to cover the costs of their business. So it has in the past felt like a trap. Totally.
Well, and it's interesting because, you get, when we can talk about and explore these themes, I think you can go from these very disparate shores, one being, consolidation, which is rapidly happening on the land all the time. Consolidation is the only way to achieve the kind of efficiency that we need in order to, have the kind of scale to feed massive amounts of people. The alternative model to that is this sort of tiny, very exclusive, very high premium, only accessible to a certain, very few people. And ne'er the twain shall meet. I mean, that is a conversation stopper right there. And what I love about this, just exploring these different ways of doing it is that, I think about the term CSA, community supported agriculture, and how it's come to mean, just this one thing, this basically subscription that you can be a part of or not be a part of. It still puts an incredible burden on the small family farm, as it's traditionally known, to both market and find ways to stay relevant and attract people. And it should be regional, but it often isn't, depending on the region. And the support structure that we need is also the one that connects most directly a human being to the land that is growing their food. And that has been completely lost in those two very disparate conversations that I was just pointing to. And there's all this middle ground. I mean, there's all these other ways that we could be doing things. And like you say, there have been, infinite indigenous versions of these concepts. And then there are more modern cooperative concepts. And yet they get thrown out as being anecdotal. And it just, there's no reason it should be. There's absolutely no reason it should be. It's just that, we have a very limited vocabulary now when it comes to talking about economics, business, and then how that relates to land. And if anything, that is the most important conversation of our time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Because I don't know. I mean, I'd be really interested to hear what people who are listening to this think, but like, it seems to me that that's where everything falls apart. Like,
totally.
That's my experience. And so I'm really excited to keep digging into this conversation, I guess. And I mean, of course, there are things like, there are land ownership conversations that are going on as well. Like you've got the Agrarian Trust in the US or the Ecological Land Cooperative. I'm sure there are more. Those are just the ones that I know about. And there's a German group called the Culture Land Cooperative. And they done something quite interesting where they own land in common or, and then rent it out for very low rates to agroecological or biodynamic farmers, I think, in many cases. But one of the things they've done is when farmers want to get out, we talked about the succession issue, they will buy the land from a retiring farmer and guarantee that it will be kept biodynamic, because often the farmer cares about that. And instead of paying the market price of the land, which is just often too much, they couldn't raise the funds for that, they will agree on a pension for the farmer. So they'll pay that farmer can say, this is how much I need per month. This is what I need for the rest of my life. And often that's less than the value of the land. And so if the farmer's happy with that, they will agree the pension or the payout, and then they take on the land and keep it in ecological land management in perpetuity. That's part of the structure of their that they've created. This is in Germany. Mm-hmm. So I just think great. That's another example, as you said, in this big spectrum of options in the middle of how you can think differently about how this all works. And I do think that the more we can have living examples of what it can look like, the better, because that big middle ground it's almost hard to imagine sometimes exactly what it looks like. And as we've already acknowledged, so really understanding what's possible there, the more examples we can get and have, and of course there are lots of examples out there, the better off we'll all be, I think. And the more we can start to see ourselves in those examples and how they could play out here or there. And
how they could help us to start to really approach with meaning and intent these issues of land access and land equity and labor, all of these issues that are just getting bigger and bigger and bigger and just becoming more and more difficult and polarizing. That there's a place in here where we're talking to address all of those things, and we shouldn't be afraid. I think that's the main point I want to end on with you, is that there's this tremendous value out there in exploring what's in between these poles that we've falsely created. And that's where healing can happen. That's where we can find a way to, sort of encircle systems, as opposed to, just assuming that this linear trajectory that we're on, just, fine point at the end. So I just really appreciate your determination and your and your approach, because I don't think it's easy to It takes a certain amount of courage and self-possession to sort of put things out there in that way. I've definitely gotten my fair share of negative emails, and you have to just kind of overcome those. But I want to thank you for your work, and also just appreciate with a real exclamation point, that you also hold yourself accountable on your own farm, your own business, to all of these things that you're exploring. Because it's very easy to talk about. It's not easy to do. It's not even remotely easy to do. But you're doing it. And I think that that's amazing and it's inspiring. And I just really appreciate you.
Thank you. I am ever grateful for your ongoing, support. And I do think that, sometimes it is a real challenge, as you say, and you get some more negative feedback on it all. And inevitably, we definitely will have said some things that have been uncomfortable or, weren't said in a way that actually was healing for all. Because in some ways it's always a learning journey, what it means to be healing for all. And because we haven't had all the experiences. And I'm always open to that. And I'm on that learning journey. And I agree, like sometimes it takes a lot to stick with that and just to be in that uncomfortable place. And definitely I know that you also apply these things to your business and to your work. And I've always appreciated, you've been very good at sharing some of the more difficult aspects to it as well, which I also really appreciate. And I think isn't shared enough. And sometimes I notice here, like, there's some things that are amazing about the farm here, and there's some things that got a long way to go before we're practicing all that we've talked about. And I think that is okay, sitting in the unknown and just knowing, being hopeful about what's possible, but not having all the answers. I guess I've come to be okay with that for now.
Yeah.
And that's very much through the support of people like you, and others who are on the journey too. So I think that, I'm unbelievably grateful for the camaraderie in this evolving landscape.
Indeed. Couldn't say that better. Is there anything that you wish we had talked about that we didn't cover?
I always ask that for Farmerama interviews.
She's taking this very seriously, people. This is why she's so good.
Oh no. For me, the main thing is just to recognize I really appreciate the multitude of voices and perspectives in this conversation. And I think it's important to recognize that I definitely started my journey from a place of, as I said, I just thought it was about the farming practices. And so I have a lot of time for people who are in that place, and don't think any of the other aspects to what we've talked about are interesting, or relevant, or maybe even anti them. Obviously, I have space for those people, and I do have a lot of hope. And I believe that as you start on this journey and you start to uncover, you can have that many people can have similar moments of opening and transforming their understanding of the world through this kind of, the start of the regenerative journey is, no longer thinking what you're going to kill every morning, and instead thinking about what are you going to nourish and have flourish. Gabe Brown often refers to that as a key difference in his approach. And I think those kinds of changes are pretty radical for people. And you can see that if you're in a killing mindset, not obviously they're not trying to kill. It's not a front and center thought, but that is essentially the context people are living in if you're farming in a conventional or chemical mindset. And so I can see it. That's really challenging to get on board with it. This is about healing and racial justice, and this is about rethinking our relationship to land.
Yeah.
So I think it's a long journey. And I think the more we can be okay with people who are at different points on that journey and stick with them, obviously it's, we can't tolerate people being harmful, but we can be open to their learning journey. And I think that is important.
Absolutely. Yep. I think it's critical. I mean, it requires a degree of patience that we should all be striving towards. And I'm pointing at myself right now because patience is not it's not at the front of my skill set. But what you said just now, I'm so glad you had to think, because it's so important. And I couldn't agree with you more. The only way I think we can get to the point where we are open to exploring this territory and these very challenged relationships and broken relationships, oftentimes it starts by just being curious about your own connection to your land and being able to make observations and changes over time can help whittle away, I think, at the barriers within ourselves to exploring how those things actually do connect to these kind of bigger themes of land ownership, land access, racial justice, even just language and culture, I mean, all of the things that, we want, all the places we want these conversations to go, there's a progression, and everybody's progression is going to be on a different timeline, and it's going to be informed by past trauma and going to be informed by their experience in just trying to stay alive and do what they do. And I'm so glad you said that, because I think that it is a mantra that we need to maintain. Yeah.
And some people more than others. Obviously, I totally get that. I'm in the position where I can keep that openness and stick with those people. And not everyone should or needs to be in that position, because others have been traumatized by those interactions many times, and they definitely don't need to put themselves in those positions at other times. But certainly for those of us who can, I think it's so important to stick with that openness, and help people as they learn and have openings for themselves, and empower people along that journey. Agreed.
Well, Abby, you have given me such a beautiful hour and a half of your afternoon in Chile, and I know your farm needs you. So I would like to very much thank you for your time, and I can't wait to listen to what you work on next, and I know we'll be friends for forever. But I would love to give you another hug one of these days. So I hope we are in the same place at the same time in the not too distant future. And we will definitely link to everything that you do, because I think everybody who listens would certainly be interested in checking out your apps and listening to Farmerama. Can't plug that one enough. And I also just want to say that the apps are very accessible. It's not a huge, they're not super expensive. They're very accessible for anybody in any type of farming. If you have the power of observation, these are incredibly powerful tools for anybody who works on the land. So I can't recommend that enough. I can't thank you enough. And I can't wait to have another conversation.
Totally. Thank you so much, Mimi. And this is, a joy always.
I remember when Mr. Chamberlain used to say, "The bell has rung," in my woodshop class when anybody was lingering. And he wanted us to get out. So I'm assuming everybody's fleeing or switching to the next podcast right now. But I really hope you enjoyed that episode with Abby from Vidacycle. And I hope that you either went first and listened to the episodes of Farmerama Radio, or that you will go and find those next. Because I think if anybody out there listened to the Red Shirt Farm episode and resonated with some of the things that Jim and I talked about, you will also find great company here in this episode with Abby, which I found so inspiring and also comforting in a lot of ways, just to know that other people are thinking about some of these issues that keep me awake at night. And I would like to just send a really strong shout out to the other sort of guest hosts, Alex and Natalie, whose episodes have been amazing, and I've really enjoyed listening to them. And I always enjoy all the other episodes put out by the No-Till Ensemble, if you will. So thank you to the amazing team behind the velvet curtain, the man wearing the sunglasses and waiting for perfection as he edits all of my strangeness. Thank you. Thank you. Your work is inspired. Adios.
Hey, you all, Farmer Jesse here, just jumping in real quick to catch you up on some of what we have going on. It's spring here in Kentucky, so basically we're just planting and planting, but we wanted to alert you to some things. No-Till Growers YouTube channel, for instance, if you've not found that yet, it is back up and running again for another season of videos. There are new guides for onion, winter squash, tomato, pepper, and spinach production, among others. Just dozens and dozens of very intensive breakdowns and farm tours and etc. Go over to YouTube and search for No-Till Growers and subscribe. We've got those videos plus a great forum at no-tillgrowers.com, plus new podcasts coming. And honestly, all of that is supported by just a handful of people who listen and watch. If you are a longtime listener or just a new listener and you've never donated or joined the Patreon page or bought a shirt or anything like that, or just if you have not in a little while, consider kicking in. Our yearly budget is less than a quarter of what some shows cost to produce a single episode. As that budget grows, we can grow the amount of work we put out there. The quality, the nerdiness, the variety, all of it. So if you loved this podcast or anything else we're doing and you have the means, there are several ways to support us at no-tillgrowers.com. Or even better, become a yearly or monthly patron at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, where not only may you get discounts on our stuff, but at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs this week to Closter Farm and Livestock Co., Sean at All About the Garden, Bill Altman, Ian at Grindstone Farms, Stephen Smith and Oh High Roots. Huge shout out to everyone who supports our show in whatever way that you can. That Patreon page, it's the lifeblood of our work, so we hope you will hop on board. And that's it for me. Thanks, y'all. We'll see you next week. Bye.